And the story is called The Tale of the Little Princess. Once upon a time, there was a little princess who lived in two castles. One castle belonged to the king, and the other belonged to the queen, and they were her parents. The king and the queen had once been married, but the little princess could never remember that long ago time, however hard she tried. On Mondays and Tuesdays, the princess lived in the king's castle, and on Wednesdays and Thursdays, she lived with the queen. Weekends were spent at each castle in turn. Life was very different in the two castles. The king's castle was small and cramped, but the little princess found buried treasure under her bed every time she came home, and her bed was covered with stuffed animals and guarded by Jemima, her magical cat. The queen's castle was much bigger, but the rules were very strict. The castle was very dirty, and the little princess was forced to cook and clean and take care of her two half-sisters, who said mean things about the king. The tooth fairy only visited the king's castle. When the little princess went to school from the king's castle, she sat next to him in his carriage. She wore whichever garments pleased her most, and she held her favourite stuffed animal in her lap. His name was Glittery Donkey. And the little princess took him most everywhere. When the little princess was studying with her tutors during the day, the king would take Glittery Donkey back to the castle with him for safekeeping, only to return at the end of the day when it was time to go home. And the little princess would always find Glittery Donkey in her seat next to the king, holding a delicious treat between his hooves. When the little princess went to school from the queen's castle, she travelled alone on the public stagecoach, because the queen couldn't spare her carriage, for it was being used to take her two half-sisters to their school. The little princess wore tattered hand-me-down skirts that were too big for her, and baggy long-sleeve shirts that were too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. She kept Glittery Donkey in a special pocket of her school bag to make sure that he didn't get lost. For once he had disappeared while she was at the queen's castle. The queen told her, "You must have left him somewhere," but the princess was certain he had been on her bed when she left for school that morning. Luckily, the king had procured an extra Glittery Donkey in case of emergencies such as these, and the little princess never left Glittery Donkey alone at the queen's castle again. One day, the king told the little princess that the countess was coming to stay with them. The princess was very excited, for the countess lived in a faraway land across the sea. It's a bit autobiographical. And they usually only saw her once a year when they rode their flying dragon to the winter festival in the mountains. The little princess looked forward to the winter festival all year round, because she was allowed to stay up late every night and spent all day playing with her special friends from across the 5 kingdoms. The little princess liked the countess because she was kind and funny and spoke to the little princess as though she were a real grown-up queen who knew a great many things. The countess always remembered to ask after Glittery Donkey and Jemima, the magical cat. When the countess arrived at the king's castle on her flying dragon, the little princess rushed out to greet her, bursting with questions. For she had heard tell that the count had banished the countess and had found a replacement countess rather quickly. "Are you terribly upset?" "I was for a time." "Why were you banished?" "Because there was no room for me at the castle anymore." "That's not very nice. Will you ever find another suitor?" The countess smiled. "Perhaps I already have." The little princess looked from the countess to the king and back again. They were both smiling. "Is it the king?" she squeaked. "Would that meet with your approval?" "Oh, yes!" The little princess clapped her hands with glee and danced with Jemima, the magical cat. When the queen found out about the king's betrothal, she flew into a rage and dispatched her spies immediately throughout the land to find out everything they could about the countess. She interrogated the little princess at every opportunity, and life in the queen's castle became most unpleasant for the little princess, whose half-sisters said mean things about the countess being strange and different. When the queen's spies could find out nothing that the queen could use against the countess, she decided to ruin the king's happiness a different way, by poisoning the little princess. Every night, when the princess was staying in the queen's castle, the queen would steal into her chamber and pour a potion into her ear. The potion was made from the fruit of the bitter drop tree, and it made the little princess terrified to stay at the king's castle. She would have nightmares in which awful things would happen to her under his roof. And during the day when she was at school, if she was to return to the king's castle that evening, she shook and cried so badly that her tutors dispatched messengers to the king begging him to send for the apothecary. The king and the countess were terribly worried about the little princess, who had grown drawn and sad, and had asked if she could stay at the queen's castle forevermore. The king was heartbroken and began to wonder if he should leave on his flying dragon for the countess's land. The king and the countess sent for the little princess's fairy godmother. When she arrived, she went directly into the princess's chamber and sat and talked with her alone. When she eventually emerged, the fairy godmother shut the princess's chamber door behind her carefully and said, "This is the work of the queen. The child has been poisoned." "Is there anything we can do?" asked the countess. "She needs rest and love, for there is no cure for the bitter drop. Only the child can cure herself, and she needs all her strength and all your love to do it. I will give her a sleeping potion now that will help her gather her strength." The little princess slept all through the day and all through the night. When she finally awoke, the king was at her bedside. "How do you feel?" "What day is it?" "It's Tuesday." "Then I'm annoyed." "Why are you annoyed?" "Because tomorrow I have to take care of my half-sisters and their friends, and they will be beastly, and I am so tired that I cannot bear the thought of it." "Then why did you agree to take care of them if you know that they will be beastly?" "I didn't get a choice. The queen decided that I would be happy to take care of them. And she told the duchess that I would take care of her children too, and they will go and visit with the dress merchants, and I have to stay with the beastly children, and it's not fair." "Oh," said the king. "Like when the queen decided that you didn't want to go to Emerald's birthday ball." "What?" "When the queen told Princess Emerald's parents that you didn't want to go to her birthday ball." The little princess sat bolt upright in her bed, scattering stuffed animals and startling Jemima, the magical cat. "What are you talking about? I wasn't invited to Emerald's ball. I thought she didn't like me anymore." Princess Emerald had been the little princess's first best friend, and they were inseparable up until the age of 6, when Emerald's parents threw a lavish ball to celebrate her birthday. The king had to tread very carefully. "No, my love, you were invited. I was to take you to the ball in my carriage, but then something happened that meant that you were to stay at the queen's castle the day of the ball. She told Emerald's parents that you didn't want to go. I'm so sorry, I thought you knew." The little princess clutched Glittery Donkey to her chest and burst into tears. "I feel so awful. Poor Emerald must have thought me so rude. She must have thought I didn't want to be friends anymore." The little princess started to sob. The king folded her in his arms, and immediately the spell was broken. The little princess felt that she had awoken from a terrible dream. She saw that the queen was not kind and truthful, like grown-ups are supposed to be. She realized that her half-sisters had just been repeating what the queen had told them to say, and she felt sorry for them. She began to notice the 101 small ways in which she had been mistreated and lied to, and she started to question the strict rules of the castle. She asked why her clothes were so tattered and torn when her half-sisters walked about in the newest, finest things, and why she had to cook and clean and was treated like a servant in her mother's house. The queen was furious and banished the little princess from her castle. So the little princess gathered up Glittery Donkey, bid farewell to her half-sisters, and never set foot in the queen's castle again. The king, the countess, the little princess, Glittery Donkey, and Jemima, the magical cat, moved to a bigger castle and lived happily ever after. The queen spent the rest of her days making up stories about why her eldest daughter didn't live with her anymore. And no one believed her, not even her children, which just goes to show that all moms are not kind. All dads are not deadbeats. All stepmothers are not wicked. And with love, most kids live happily ever after. The end.